These things I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, good morning. We're going to start a series of sermons off early winter here about Genesis. And over the next few weeks, we're going to cover some of the major stories there in Genesis. A lot of people are trying to read through their Bible this year. And Genesis often is where those studies start. And if you're in the middle of that, some of this will be familiar to you too. And that's pretty cool to me. I heard a story this week that somebody told me, and I hadn't heard before, about a mom was taking her kid home from preschool, and they picked him up and got him in the back seat there, and all strapped up, and they're taking off down the road. And he looks real troubled as they're going away. Something bothering him. And Mom says, "What's going on?" And "Oh, nothing." "What's going on? What's happening? Something happened to school?" And he said, "Where do I come from anyway? How did I come?" And like Mom said, well, in her head, she said, "Well, I wasn't really wanting to get into the whole thing today, but I'm ready, and the birds and the bees," and tried to explain that best she could to him, and what was going on, and with that, and how he came to be, and she, at the end of it, she takes 3 or 4 or 5 minutes there, and she's doing the best she can, gets through it, and she says, "Okay, that all makes sense?" He goes, "Jimmy says he's from Ohio," and I hadn't heard that. Thought that was funny. A couple of years ago, when I was a youth minister, we started hitting on a thing. It's possible as a preacher or a youth minister or a preacher of any sort, teacher, you're answering questions nobody's really asking. You're into something that you find interesting, but nobody else really cares. And so we started doing a thing in youth group, and I've done it occasionally since then, just in different settings. Pass out note cards. Any question you have about the Bible or about life or about whatever, I think the Bible has the answers. Let's see if we can't figure it out together. And stump the preacher is kind of the idea of it. And what I found about those kinds of events is most of the questions deal with Genesis, and especially the creation stuff. A lot of the questions are, how did it all happen? How did it all start? How old is God? What about the dinosaurs? It's those kinds of questions. And I thought about that story with the mom and the preschooler and trying to, you can end up and you think you're communicating, but you're not. And it's possible, I think the Bible does have answers to those kind of things. I do. I'm not sure those answers are right there at the beginning of Genesis. I think some of those answers are there, and I think some science happens kind of accidentally in how Genesis is written. But the main agenda of Genesis, of the creation story in Genesis, is not to tell you how everything started, but why. You remember when Genesis was written, the ancient world, nobody really disagreed there was probably a God behind it. The argument was, which God? I mean, nobody really disagreed there's probably some spiritual realities we don't understand. But the disagreement was, well, which God? Which God did it? And why did God do it? And those were the questions they were more concerned about. And Genesis is answering those questions. And like I said, while there's some science that pops up in there too, where you could read it and say, oh, I see what's going on here. There is some of that, but that's not the main agenda. Because even the way it's written, like light pops up in the very first day of the week, and the sun and the moon don't come till day 4. And so he's not really trying to paint, and you could say, well, stupid ancient people had no idea how light worked. They understood. I mean, there's a chronological snobbery here. And your great-grandparents are not that much dumber than you, or your great-great-great-grandparents, or your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents are not that much dumber than you. We certainly have more information at our disposal than ever before, but people have largely been people for the whole time. And they understood what light was, and they understood where light came from. And so they're not trying to explain it like what it is, but why it is. There's more of, and I'll get into that here as we get into this thing this morning. Because I think it's a really important thing. I think if you understand the creation story and understand what God's trying to say and through the creation story, you start to see what you're about and why you're here. If you understood why God did it, then you start to understand, well, why me then? Why am I here? What's the agenda for me being here? And you might have been an accident to your parents, but you weren't an accident to God. God had a plan for you, and there is a plan for you, and there's a place you're supposed to be in, and I think Genesis hits on all that kind of stuff. So let's talk about that. The very first verse of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And in the beginning, notion here. It's not the beginning of God because God's already there, right? So it's not the beginning of God. God, and there's other verses in the Bible we'll talk more about this, but God is from eternity. He's from eternity. He's to eternity. He's timeless and ageless and eternal, and there's no beginning for God. But there is a beginning here. It's just not God. In the beginning, it says God created the heavens and the earth. The next verse says, and the earth was formless and empty. King James, I think, says void. And the idea that those words there's no point to it. And darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovering over the waters. And he uses a couple different word pictures there to paint chaos for you. The ocean, and it's just a lot of storms and stuff, and it's all dark. Completely dark and storms. And it's a picture of chaos, a picture of disorder. Nothing was right. Nothing was together. Nothing was there. Now, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void and formless and empty, and the darkness was there, and the Spirit of God hovering. We sang about that just a second ago. We sang about that. The Spirit was hovering over the waters, and Spirit come move over us. And that picture, right? The same way that the Spirit was moving over the waters there at the beginning, nothing but chaos. We want God to come do that for us. And so the creation story is about God pushing back at the disorder of the world. And it's not the beginning of God. And strictly from Genesis chapter 1, you could make an argument it's not even totally the beginning of the world, because the world's there. It's just dark and empty and void, right, in this poem, in this telling of it. Now, I think that God did make the world. Don't believe you're thinking something. But just from the context of what's being said here, the beginning is our story. It's the beginning of God's plan for us. God's plan, and you'll see that as we go along. In the beginning was nothing but chaos, and then God speaks, and he says, let there be light. And God's words, right, are springing into the air, and there's never been a sound heard other than the waters and the darkness, and now God speaks, and there's light. Have you ever been in a cave, and it's just crazy dark, and they turn all the lights out for a minute there, and it's a darkness you can almost feel, and somebody lights one candle or one lighter in the middle of the room, and you can see again. Everything's just a little bit of light can change everything, and God speaks into the chaos. He speaks into the void, and now there's something. There was nothing, and now there's something, and it's all because of God. The second law of thermodynamics says that everything tends towards chaos. You can't conserve energy. If you don't apply energy to it, whatever it is, it tends towards chaos. Everything in our world works that way. It tends towards destruction. There's an AI program that Josh has been using, and he told me about it. It's a free AI where you can ask the computer to come up with an answer to a hard question. So I asked the computer this week, explain the law of thermodynamics to me, second law of thermodynamics, as if I was 5 years old. And the answer was, well, you know how your room gets dirty, and unless you go clean it, it just gets worse? That's the second law of thermodynamics. And I thought, oh, that's pretty good. I'm going to put that in the sermon. And I mentioned that today in the first service, and I had somebody say, you're not AI in the whole service. And I said, no, it'd be much smarter if I was AI in the whole thing. But that I thought was pretty smart. No, that's pretty clever right there. Because we see that, right? Our whole world, if you don't apply energy to it, it just gets worse. Right? And that's everything. Your car, if you don't apply some energy to it every so often, it just gets worse. Why is this steering wheel so sticky? And it just stays sticky until somebody applies some energy to it. It just will keep getting worse. That's the way, and it's not just stuff, it's the people. If you ignore a kid, if a parent doesn't actively parent, if in a relationship, the guy and a girl are in a relationship and he decides to just ignore her, or she decides just to kind of go her own way, well, the relationship, you think you can coast in life, and you can't, or not very long. As soon as you quit applying energy to whatever it is, it starts falling apart. That's how life works, right? That's chaos. Our world tends towards chaos. And God speaks into the chaos and says, let there be light. And everything starts to change. Everything starts to evolve. God applies the energy to it, and it's new now, and it's different. It's not the same thing. He called the light day, he called the darkness night, and there was evening, and there was morning, and it was the first day. Now, again, when you're thinking of this light, you want to think a little bit metaphorically, because he won't make the sun and the moon until the fourth day. He's not talking literal. The light is God. God is the light that comes into the world. Let there be light. He's moving in. Like a modern example of that would be if you were watching your TV there at night and the newscaster says, today the White House announced that this was going to happen. You know the House didn't actually speak, right? It's the guy in the White House that talked. It's the guy who lives in the White House. He's the one who spoke. And this idea of light, it's God. God's the light that comes into the world. And doesn't just come into the world, but he brings order into the world. There's a verse that Paul uses in Acts. He says, in him, in God, we live and move and have our being. Like he holds it all together. It's all God. I read a guy named, his last name was, let me find it here, Boubet. That's the wrong thing. Hang on. He's a there it is. Boubet, Richard Boubet. He said he had this whole article. He says what would happen if God decided in heaven, I'm just not going to be God anymore. I'm just going to quit being God. I mean, you go do your own thing. I'll do my own thing. I'm no longer going to do God things. What would happen to this world if God just retired completely? What would happen to this world? And he said he asked that. He's a professor. He asked that question to his students, and the students thought, well, I guess, there wouldn't be any love anymore, or we wouldn't have a hope of heaven. This world would be all there is, but we'd kind of keep going on. And he goes, that's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches that God holds it all together. Without God influencing it, it's just chaos. That God holds the very atoms of your body together. I mean, without him here, without him influencing it, there's nothing. It's an interesting thought. That's not Bible, it's just this one guy's opinion, but I think it's an interesting thought. He compared it to a television show. You're watching a television show, and there's actors, and there's a story, and you're kind of following along what goes on, and then somebody unplugs the TV. What happens to the characters? Are they less loving now? No, they're not there. I mean, if there's no power, that's it. There's no show. A guy named John Walton, he's a professor at Wheaton, he's commenting on that idea that Boubet had said. He said, we like to think that God is like the conductor of this big orchestra, but he's more than that. God's the music. And if he's not there, then there's just nothing. There's no point to any of it. It's just empty and void. When we read Revelation and we take that mystery part of it out, and we reduce it just to, okay, this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and this must be this long, and this must be that long. We try to take what we know about evolution and Big Bang and everything else and that's the wrong way to read this thing. The way to read those first couple verses is God came here, it was chaos, and he shone into it. He's the light of the world, and everything started to change. Now, riffing on that same idea, John in the New Testament, he's talking about Jesus. And in John 3:16 says, God so loved the world, gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. And then just a few verses after that, right? He says, here's the verdict, though. Light has come into the world, meaning Jesus. God so loved the world, gave his only Son. Light has come into the world, but the people love darkness more than light because their deeds were evil. It was just hard for people to take Jesus because they wanted to do what they wanted to do. There's this weird independent streak in us, even when it's foolish and even when it's harmful, that we have a hard time listening. And we have a hard time subjugating our will to anybody else's. And Jesus comes in and there's the light, but a lot of people ignored it. They just weren't, and they still ignore it. And a lot of people ignore it not because they're really doubtful about whether Jesus existed or not. They just don't want to adjust their life to deal with that. They prefer where they are. Now, that's not to say that everybody is in chaos without Jesus. I mean, some people can have a life that's pretty regimented, can be pretty organized, can seem pretty successful on the outside, but the teaching here is that without God's influence, we tend towards chaos. And a lot more people are living in chaos than than like to admit it, right? I mean, like on a scale of 1 to 10, if 0 is complete chaos and 10 is completely together, a lot more people hovering around 1 or 2 or 3 than like to pretend. And the weird part is you think that you would do anything to get out of that chaos, and yet it's just hard to let go of it. I remember talking to a guy a long time ago. He's on his computer and he's downloading pictures. This was back when the computer was still a relatively new technology, and it took him about 30 minutes to download naked pictures. It wasn't an easy thing to do, and yet he was doing it, and it was going to cost him everything, going to cost him his marriage and everything else. And finally, his wife said, "You've got to choose the computer or me." And so he got rid of the computer, but she was still mad at him. And it's because he's watching HBO and everything else, and he's gravitating towards the very worst things, right? He wants to see the stuff. And so he's finding ways to cheat. And so we talk about that. I say, listen, you're going to get rid of all that stuff. And he looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language, but everybody has cable TV. Well, that's nuts, though. You shouldn't do that. I mean, you see where this is taking you, and it's just a little thing. Well, yeah, but I don't. And we had this whole argument. I remember talking to a guy a young guy, and we're having a conversation, and his dad had been drunk a lot growing up, and it affected everything in their family, just constantly affecting things in the family. And he told one story where there was a pool party for the kids. A bunch of the little guy's friends, he was 10, 11, 12 years old. A bunch of his friends came over for a pool party. Dad had passed out on one of the chairs there at the pool. And the kid is having to lie to his friends. Yeah, he's just really tired, all afternoon. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with Dad. Isn't that funny? He's just really sleepy, I guess. And so we're talking about it. And the reason we're having a conversation is because I know he's drinking a lot more. I know he's drinking more and more and more. I see he's posting about it and stuff, and he's talking about the different things he's doing. I say, man, are you sure this is where you want to be? He goes, I think I'm handling it a lot better than he did. Well, I know, but you're 20. Do you think you always will? Don't you think he thought that too? I mean, are you sure this is the road? Oh, it'll be different for me. Isn't that the weirdest thing? And you don't know those things, but you've seen other stuff just like it. It's the craziest thing. I mean, all you've got to do is this and this and this. You'll be fine. Oh, I don't know, man. I don't know if I can. I don't know if I want to. And here's the verdict. Lights come into the world. God says, let there be light, but people aren't sure. There's a part of us that kind of likes the chaos, or at least is comfortable in the chaos. Maybe that's a better way to say it than we like it. We don't really like it, but we understand it. Minirth and Meyer, two psychiatrists who have written a ton of books on psychiatry and Christianity, talk about if you have one really broken person, one really broken woman, grew up in a terrible house, and one really broken man, and you put them in a party of 100 people, and everybody else is fine, but these two are really broken, they will find each other before the end of the evening. They may leave as a couple. It's the weirdest, craziest thing in the world, and it happens over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. There's just something about us that understands the chaos. And then God whispers, let there be light. And there's this whole other plan, and it's so attractive. Will you take it or not? If I can riff on this just a little bit longer too. Eric gets up here and talks about earlier in the communion meditation. He says they go into this house, and here's two little girls who have been sleeping on the living room floor. And because of your generosity, right, because of you giving money to it and you giving time to it, and because of this church getting excited about it, we're able to give these two girls a bed, right? And you bring this little bit of order into the chaos. Right, this little breath of air into the chaos. It's nothing it's all chaos. And then you come in and you make some sort of a little difference there, and you give people a chance. And that's what God does here. Everything's chaos, and God comes in and he opens a way, and he opens a door. And will you take it or will you not? Will you do it or will you not? Chaos always wants to creep back in. In just a few chapters in Genesis, we're going to read about Noah's Ark. And Noah's Ark, it's interesting that God chooses the darkness and the flood to come back in as a punishment. It's like if you want chaos, then have chaos. And God abandons people to what they want. Hell at some level is that. If that's what you want, then that's what you want. And God lets you go your own direction. But there's this other way. And it whispers and calls out to us, let there be light. All of the rest of the creation story, if you read it, I'm not going to read all of it on the slides. Like day 1 and 2 and 3 kind of work together with day 4, 5, and 6. And in day 1, he calls out light, and then day 4, he regulates it. There's a sun and a moon and stars. And day 2, he separates the sky and the sea. And then on day 5, he makes fish and birds. So they kind of go together. And day 3 makes the dry land. And then day 6, he makes the animals. And he makes all the people and everything. It's all settled. So like he makes it and he regulates it and he's bringing all this order into it. And over again says there was morning and evening. It was another day, and it was good. It was good. It was good. It was good. And there's an agenda for all that too, right? By making it so good and it stands out against the chaos. We know our whole lives tend to chaos, but it's so good. It's supposed to bring you back to him. Psalms talks about that. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the skies proclaim the work of his hands. And day after day, they put forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge. And though they have no real speech, right? They use no words. There's no sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth. Their words go out to the end of the world. You walk out into this creation, and you can feel it. If you just kind of pay attention for a second. Carl Sagan, in 1975, I think it was 75 or 76, somewhere in there, he applies to the government for a grant because he wants to set up a tower to listen for radio signals from space. He wants to see if there's intelligent life out there in space. And he tells the panel that he's applying to, what we're looking for is order and pattern. If we hear a radio signal and there's order and pattern to it, then we're going to assume that's intelligent life. That makes sense, right? Because the world tends towards chaos. And so if you see some rules, then you can assume the hand of God. And that's what science is. The reason we can study chemistry or biology or physics, the reason we can do mathematics is because there's rules. Certain things work certain ways. Into all the chaos God has breathed, and the heavens declare his glory. I mean, he's right there. You just got to take him up on it. Well, at the very end of the creation story, one last thing on this deal. Very end of the creation story, God says, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that he may rule, or they may rule, over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and the livestock and the wild animals, over all the creatures move along the ground. He says, God created mankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. Now, when it says he made you in his image, it's not talking, I don't think, physically. He's made you to be light, the same way he's light. Jesus says, I'm the light of the world, but Jesus also says, you're the light of the world. So in the same way that God has come to push the chaos back, you've been called to come and push the chaos back and to speak for God. We're made in his image. When we go out and we live the gospel out in this world, we actually can make a difference that way. You really can. I mean, one person can make a fantastic amount of difference in a team or in a classroom or in a workplace. One person who intentionally tries to be kind, who intentionally tries to lift up, who intentionally tries to find the broken and bring them to a better place. One person can change all that. And you push the chaos back. And we all know what the chaos looks like, right? And so we're made in his image. All the same creative impulse that he has, we have that too. And we can go out in his name and do things that he wants done. And that's the whole point of the first chapter of Genesis. In the beginning, God set you up. He put a whole world around you that just cries out that he's there. And he gave you a job. You're to be an image bearer for him to represent. One thing I'm not very good at, Julia's very good at it, and I'm not, is we'll go visit a family that has a new baby. And Julia will say, "Oh, I can see your eyes," or "I can see, oh, he's got your nose." I never see any of that. Every baby looks like a grumpy old man to me. They all look the same. I don't see any difference. But she will. "Oh, look there! I think I saw a little grin. Looks just like you." Now, as they grow up and they're in that house, I'll start to see it. I can see it after a while. I can see it pretty quick. The longer they live there, the longer they're with mom and dad, I can see it. You're made in God's image, every one of you. He has His fingerprints all over you. But the more you spend time with God, the more you connect with God, the more you ask God to move in your life, the more you're going to resemble Him. The more we'll see our Father's eyes in you. The more we'll see His handiwork in you. And the more that you reflect Him like you're supposed to, the more you'll push back the chaos. Everybody matters to God. One of the key themes of everything I teach is that you matter to God. I know some of you are in bad situations, There's some chaos. Some of the chaos is your fault. You did it. Some of the chaos has nothing to do with you at all. But you're there, and we all know what that feels like. And after a while, you can get so used to the chaos, you can assume that that's what you're made for. That you're no better than that. You're just in the middle of it. And you're made in God's image. You have dignity and you matter to God. You have responsibility to spread His light and to shine Him wherever you can. And I didn't put it on the slide, but that first chapter of Genesis, there at the end of all that. Actually, I think it's the second chapter. Same story there. It pops up right there at the very beginning. It says, on the seventh day, by the seventh day, God had finished the work He had been doing, and on the seventh day He rested from all His work. And God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it He rested from all the work that He had done. And later on, the Jewish people will make that the Sabbath. That's the Sabbath day, and that's the day you the seventh day is a Sabbath. Seventh means Sabbath, and you honor that day as a day for God. What's interesting about that verse, when you read the whole song, every time there's a day, like on the first day, He makes light, day, morning and evening, but there's no morning and evening at the end of the Sabbath. It just kind of continues. Like on the seventh day, God rested. It's all done, and it just kind of continues, and anybody can go into that rest. It's like an open invitation. In the New Testament, Jesus, riffing on that same idea, it's where we get our bed ministry slogan idea. He says, "Come to me if you're weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my cross upon you, my yoke upon you, and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls." And anybody can do that. The rest, it's an open invitation to come into His rest, His order, His plan. And you can be changed. And then you can shine too. Whether you're making beds in some trailer, or whether you're taking the gospel to somebody who's never heard it before, whether you're just being kind. In every workplace, in every schoolroom, and in every neighborhood, there are people there who are just beat up by the world. And if you just took a half a second not to think about yourself, it's always obvious who they are, and you can see them, and so you can make some difference there. And the more that you shine into their life, the more you're going to look like Jesus, in whose image you are. And you'll be tied in with His grand plan, heading towards a heaven where there is no sea. There's no chaos. The whole Bible, I'm starting to rant. I'm sorry. This isn't anything at all like first service. I'm sorry if I've gotten so far away from what I was wanting to do, and I apologize. But this is the point, right? This is the whole thing. The whole Bible's about this. Everything we ask you to do, when we ask you to know God, it's because He has the better plan. We ask you to love others. That's how you shine. When you love, when you serve, that's how you do it. That's how you push the chaos back. When Jesus walks on the water in the New Testament, that's what that's about. That's why He does that stuff. He's in charge of the storm. There's no more chaos with Him. When Jesus touches the sick, the sickness runs away. You know, if somebody has COVID, I don't get close to them because their sickness could come onto me. But when Jesus touches the sick, the sickness runs away. His health bleeds into the other person. This is what you're invited into. And it's a whole new reality. And I think sometimes as Christians we miss it. I think Genesis as a book, especially this early part, is so much richer than just how did the world come. It's why you're here. So I want to pray for you here at the end. And if anybody in here needs to draw close to God, you know, that's why we do this thing at the end. Come pray. There should always be something on your heart to pray about. And maybe you don't come up here and pray. I'm a little scared to get in front of people. But then pray with each other, you know. And you may freak your spouse out if you've never done this before. Hey, you know, we could pray. You could whisper that to them right there. And don't feel like you got to say a lot. Jesus even talks about that. The hypocrite feels like he'll be hurt because of many words. You don't have to pray a lot of words. Just God help us. That's a great prayer. And come back to Him. Ask God to shine in your life. Ask God to push the chaos back just for a minute so you can see Him better. And that's what we do at the end of the service, and I want to pray for you now as we do that. So let's pray. Dear Lord God, I thank you for this group. And I know, God, there's people in all sorts of different places here. Some who are doing quite well, and some who are just knee-deep in chaos. Some neck-deep in chaos. So I pray for all of them. I pray for the ones who are carrying a heavy load, maybe something they had nothing to do with, but they're carrying it, and it's just weighing them down. And this notion, God, that we can come to you and get rest, and God, that we can pray about this thing, and while it won't immediately solve all the problem, it makes it better. It makes us better. It turns our heads the right way again. It gets our hearts set the right way again. It gets other people engaged again. God, you're still with us. You're still fighting for us. I pray for anybody here who needs to call out to you today, that you give them the courage to do it. In Jesus' name, amen. Won't you stand up?